All right, good afternoon, everybody, or it's afternoon here, and welcome to the Barlow Brain and Body Institute. This is going to be our Hippocampus seminar, kind of the intro to the hippocampus, kind of where it is, what's its function, how can you help improve function, and, what happens when we actually decrease function. Of course, we won't get through all of that tonight because we're only on for 20 minutes, so let's get this thing going. So if we actually draw out the brain, the best, kind of the best way I can do it is just kind of draw the side view right here. All right. And then we've got the central sulcus and in here in the Sylvian fissure right below here at the bottom. This is our temporal lobe, parietal lobe, frontal lobe, and occipital lobe. And in this temporal lobe region here, we have what is called the hippocampus. And so the hippocampus is actually Greek for seahorse. And back in the day, when somebody started digging around and looking into brains back in the day, they were like, wow, that thing kind of looks like a seahorse. So that's where the name hippocampus actually come from. Now, what's important here, the hippocampus, like every other part of the body, doesn't function by itself. It's not in isolation. So what we have is we have our prefrontal lobe, okay, in the front here that has to do with focus, okay. I just call it FACE, which is an easy acronym to remember, and that's focus, attention, concentration, and executive function. So executive function would be things like social skills, social graces, personality, being able to plan things, to be goal oriented. Those are higher order brain functions. So this focus, and think of it from this standpoint, to actually concentrate with the focused attention and concentration, you actually have to focus and pay attention. So it's focus, attention, and concentration. And then what will happen in this situation through what is called encoding, E-N-C-O-D-I-N-G, encoding, this focus, attention, and concentration through what is called long-term potentiation is what allows us to learn and maintain our memory. So, and what is long-term potentiation? What is it? It's repetition and intensity. So this is why when doctors are in my coaching program, this is why they understand that getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and this is why very few people can step up to that challenge and actually learn this type of information, because they understand that long-term potentiation has to do with intensity and if you will, repetition. So, and just think, if you want to make a bigger bicep or bigger, tricep or bigger pec muscles or deltoids, what do you have to do? You got to work out, and it's got to be repetition and intensity. And learning is exactly the same way. Being able to focus, pay attention, and concentrate for long periods of time without fatiguing. And then what this actually does through what is called the encoding, it implants that focus, attention, and concentration into short-term memory. So what happens actually in the frontal lobe, I know this is a hippocampus seminar, but you got to get this frontal lobe part down, because the frontal lobe fires into the hippocampus for memory. We have one of the things that's called working memory. There's a lot of different types of memory, but working memory is one of those where you're in a procedural type of let's say, for example, you're going to go outside and you need to get your shoes. And then you walk into a room and you go, man, I can't remember why I walked in here. That's a form of working memory. And the sad part about this is when your working memory starts to go at the beginning, you're already starting to move into that stage 2 Alzheimer's. And if we get this, focus, attention, and concentration is actually stage 2. When we start to lose our working memory, which is starting into stage 3, is that walking into a room and forgetting why you walked in there. You call somebody on the phone, you can't remember why you called them. That's working memory. You're in conversation, you can't remember what you were talking about. So see, those are types of working memory. And see, if we're having problems with this focus, attention, and concentration with working memory, we can't actually encode this. This is called the Hippocampus, P-E-Z-E E, I think is the name, but you can look it up. But the PES circuit, so it's the way that we encode this information and basically take it from short-term memory, which is actually working memory, focus, attention, and concentration, short-term memory, into this long-term memory. And this is where our hippocampus is located in the temporal lobe, and its function is for long-term memory. Now, this hippocampus is also linked to the amygdala. Now, why is this important? Because if something has brought harm to you, like you stick your hand in a fire, you might want to remember that I don't need to do that again. Okay, if a person has wronged you, these are emotional. The best way to learn things long term is to actually do it from an emotional standpoint. So believe it or not, when Socrates, back in the day, when he would tell his students something that they wanted him to learn, what he'd do, he'd just like, bam, just slap them in the face. And so it's like that, you needed to learn that, you needed to own that, you needed to, so see that emotional slap across the face, that amygdala, ow, that hurt, that emotional component, that this is why we have, it sticks with us, like a loss of, of a loved one in our family. We know when they died. Look at, again, when it's embedded in our brain in America is 9/11. Okay, so see that those are those emotional types of learning. And then, it's like, hey, I don't want to go down that street because the last time I was down there, somebody got mugged or whatever. So again, we need this link to the amygdala, so that we can go, don't do that. There's pain associated with that. There's anxiety associated with that, but also fear. And this is why my level 1 is coming up. Fear is a powerful motivator, but 90% of the things that I think Brian Tracy said 99% of the things we fear never come to pass anyway. So what happens is that little amygdala that we have here is, instead of having us fear something from a survivalistic standpoint of don't stick your hand back in the fire, don't stick your finger in that little hole that's in the electrical outlet right there. Okay, but see this fear of public speaking, because when you were one time when you were in the 5th grade, you got it in front of a class and they started laughing at you. So see that's embedded in this hippocampus. So this is why we, if we understand this, then if we recognize this, then we can actually learn something from it. So we've got these fears. Some are rational, some are reasonable, or some are unreasonable. They're actually embedded in this hippocampus. Now, this hippocampus is also linked to our hypothalamus. Okay. Now, this hypothalamus, what does it do? It sets the tone of our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So what happens when we, have a fear situation? Fear. Oh, the hippocampus goes, I remember that. We're not supposed to do that again. But whenever we do that, even if we think about it, okay, this thought process fire to the amygdala, fire to the hippocampus, and your hippocampus goes, yeah, I remember that. And then what happens? All because of something we thought about, we get this entire hypothalamus rage that goes on. So we start this sympathetic nervous system function, and then we start to release not only from our autonomic nervous system from sympathetic overdrive, then we start to release hormones and endorphins and all that from our hypothalamus. And then what happens? We get this cascade of hormonal dysregulation. Now, also what happens is you get this crazy windup with stress, and then we have physical stress, which means it physically brings us pain. Okay, and let's say that, I don't know, let's say I twisted my ankle today in racquetball, and then it can't heal, and see that chronic pain, and then now I can't sleep at night, and now I'm stressed out because I can't play racquetball anymore because I love playing racquetball. And see, all of those stresses, what they're going to do is they're actually going to release cortisol. So if we get head trauma, boom, from a car crash, we're going to release cortisol because of that stress. And then see, your brain doesn't understand the difference between physical stress and emotional stress, because the human beings, man, we play major games with ourselves because we've got this little prefrontal cortex where we can reason and rationalize things. So, and it's amazing how human beings are. Is no other animal on the planet Earth does this. But we a lot of times have problems actually doing the right things. Okay, and then but what's amazing is we spend more time doing the wrong things. We spend a lot of time doing things that actually harm us, either from a psychological standpoint or a physiological standpoint. And so it's amazing how this frontal lobe, this prefrontal cortex plays games with us. So this is why meditation and focus is so important, because what we want to do is we want to get this hippocampus here that's firing to the amygdala, that's firing to the hippocampus, that's going to regulate our hormones and our autonomic nervous system. This is why meditation and deep breathing is so important. So focusing on the right things, doing the right things, and stop ourselves from doing the wrong things to actually get our cortisol under control, because what will happen, cortisol is one of the major killers of our hippocampus. So your hippocampus, when we actually have long-term stress, again, either physiological stress or emotional stress, these stressors are actually going to trigger cortisol, and cortisol destroys brain function. Now, also the hippocampus here has to do with our circadian rhythm. So one of the first symptoms, and I'm not saying that if you're getting insomnia or you've had insomnia, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to get Alzheimer's. But see, when we start looking at this with the hippocampus, all right, so you start to lose focus, attention, and concentration in the executive function, all right? We start to lose that in early onset Alzheimer's or dementia. And then as we start to lose even more of this, we end up actually forgetting things. Okay, we go from focus to actually forgetting. Then what happens? You get people that go in rage. Okay, because what happens is their amygdala can't be controlled by their hippocampus, and the hippocampus is not communicating properly with the amygdala. And see, the prefrontal cortex, what it does, it actually inhibits this. Okay, because see, your prefrontal cortex is it's like the captain of the ship. Your amygdala may go, man, from a reflex standpoint, because your amygdala is there just to keep you alive, and then like if a tree falls, your amygdala is like, what the heck was that? And then you're startled, and then the prefrontal cortex goes, chill, dude, everything's all right. That tree limb that fell is like 100 yards over there. But see, when we get the dementia and Alzheimer's, and we lose this focus, attention, and concentration, now we can't regulate the amygdala, and it does what the amygdala does: panic, anxiety, and fear, and rage. Okay, and guess where all that rage goes? Right here, because there's a feedback loop from the hippocampus to the amygdala. So again, when people come into my clinic and they actually have had a head trauma, the little fender bender where I was going 50 miles an hour and flipped the car 3 times and hit a tree and totaled my car, but I'm completely okay. Then see what happens. You start to get the inflammation in the brain for these glial cells, and the glial cells, what they do is they actually start to cause inflammation in your brain. Now the vagus nerve can't function properly. What is the vagus nerve? It's your sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now we start to get this sympathetic overdrive. We're under stress. What does stress do? Release cortisol, and cortisol destroys brain function and the hippocampus. Now, the next thing that I want to go over with you, I've got about 7 minutes. Okay. And then when we are dealing with the hippocampus, now don't forget, again, it's in the temporal lobe. So let me draw this back out one more time. We'll probably end with this tonight. Okay, in the temporal lobe. All right, so what we want to know with this hippocampus, all right, is also, since it's in the temporal lobe, what might it be associated with? And this is why we need to understand what is involved, what is in our temporal lobe. So let's just talk about our right temporal lobe first, because it's called the non-dominant hemisphere. And then our left temporal lobe is our left side of the brain is called our dominant hemisphere. The reason it's called dominant is because for 97% of people, that's where our communication part of our brain is, our Broca's area, and in our temporal lobe, our Wernicke's area, where we actually understand what people are saying. This is an association cortex for the written word and for auditory input. So, like for example, if you're somebody who speaks a foreign language and you don't speak that language, you can actually hear what they're saying. That's your Heschel's gyrus. You can hear the words coming out of their mouth, but your Wernicke's area has no association to those words. It's just nothing but sounds. Okay, so if we have if we're just talking about the dominant, let's just go to the dominant side. So if we have a temporal lobe problem on the left side, see, we can still have memory issues, but with that, we're going to have problems basically understanding what someone says. Why would we have a problem with that? Because in your left temporal lobe, okay, not only do you have a hippocampus for memory, but in Wernicke's area, that's where we actually understand what someone is saying. So these are people who you may have to repeat yourself, or if it's terrible, really bad, like they've had a stroke in that area, then they're not actually going to be able to understand what you're saying. So auditory input, are we? I'm not saying if you have tinnitus, tinnitus could be a lot of things, but if it's in the left temporal lobe, we're going to have problems understanding what someone is saying. So problems understanding what someone's saying. And then it's like, wow, this person has some memory issues. They can't really understand what you're saying. And so that would be a left temporal lobe problem. Also, when we actually plot out our visual pathways, the right half of both eyes see the world with our left brain, but it gets even better because in your superior visual field in the right side, we actually see that world with our left temporal lobe. And you can go through and just Google the visual pathways, and you can see that. But this, what happens, this is called TOP, T-O-P, and temporal lobe. This is the eyeball for zero and parietal lobe. So what will happen is through the temporal lobe, you'll hit the eyeball. It will refract the sensory input, fire to the lateral geniculate nucleus, and then it's going to fire through the hippocampus. So this superior visual field that we see, we actually see that with our temporal lobe. So if we understand the neurology behind it, the right superior visual field fires into our left temporal lobe. Smell is actually going to fire ipsilateral back to our left temporal lobe. So smell in the left nostril will fire directly back. Now, here's what's important. If patients have problems smelling something, then that's going to be more of a temporal lobe. Can you smell it? But being able to identify what the smell is, again, this is a orbitofrontal lobe right over your eyeball. So again, this is the neurological loop between cognition and memory, is being able to smell and actually identify what the smell is. And then taste fires ipsilateral back again. So we got sight, contralateral superior visual field, taste ipsilateral, smell ipsilateral, and then sound. Sound is a 60-40 split. So that means that if sound comes into my left ear, 60% of it will decussate to the left brain, and then 40% will stay ipsilateral. So when people start to have temporal lobe demise, say they start to hear things, they can. I'm not saying everybody does, but this is why with people, when they start to have this hippocampus problem with Alzheimer's, they hear things that nobody else hears. Okay, they may see things. It's like, oh, I saw Jimmy out there in the yard. And it's like, damn, dude, Jimmy's been dead for like 10 years. And so again, it's that visual hallucination. We can have auditory hallucination, just like you're sitting there watching the TV and the TV's off, and it's like, and the guy sitting next to you, unfortunately, somebody that sits next to you, it's like, the TV just came on and I saw a purple dragon going across there. Well, see, that's a visual hallucination. So again, and then so we can have panic, anxiety, and fear because all of those fire into the hippocampus. And see, we start to understand that, again, nothing happens in isolation. And so when people, like I had a medical doctor that came in last week, he didn't do care, 92 years old, and had some knee problems. And I'm like, man, you got Parkinson's, you got all these other things. And my staff had to tell him 5 times how to get to this clinic. Now, Tupelo is not, New York City. It's not Chicago. It's not Houston. You shouldn't have to tell somebody 5 times how to get to your clinic. And see, this visual spatial information also fires into your temporal lobe. So if you have to tell people directions and how to get somewhere multiple times, we want to think from a standpoint of visual spatial, which could be a temporal lobe hippocampus problem. You should be able to hold at least 5 letters or 5 numbers in your head at one time. This is a great way to tell if somebody has short-term memory, which would be more frontal lobe. And the way we want to know more about temporal lobe, you can ask things about things they learned in high school. When did Columbus discover America? When did, what day is it? What city are you in? What is your spouse's name? What is your child's name? Those kind of things. And who's the president of the United States? Who was the last president of the United States? So see, you can start asking these short-term and long-term questions to determine, is this a frontal lobe problem or is it a temporal lobe problem? So I wanted to wrap this up today in 20 minutes. I think next week what we're going to talk more about, and Randall can set me up with this, on things that can actually destroy the hippocampus. And the amazing thing, I'm going to leave it with this, is the hippocampus is one of the 2 areas of the brain that actually have neural stem cells. So this is going to be the cliffhanger for next week. Why do people get Alzheimer's if we actually have neural stem cells that are produced in our hippocampus? So we should be, from a rational standpoint, never get Alzheimer's, because we should be producing neural stem cells in our hippocampus. So why does that happen? So tune in next week and learn why. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you guys next weekend, next Tuesday night. Bye-bye.